I'm teaching a policy class this semester, and we're talking about how oftentimes we live in this sort of Truman Show like world where special interests and big industry really dominate these types of written and verbal, even audio news that we're exposed to. And I really encourage my students to think of it as some kind of choreographed play or dance. It's very orchestrated and it's very well rehearsed. And I just made a video for them about this notion of astroturfing, which is essentially this very deceptive type of this bombardment of news that is actually paid for and created by special interests. But it's packaged as though it were news or some kind of independent article. So, many of our news sources and media are actually paid for by pharmaceutical companies and the food industry. And this video that I made is something that I call double vision. And that's really symbolic here in a lot of ways. It tells the story of Rachel Carson, who was one of the founders of the environmental movement and opposed the use of DDT, or at least, encouraged people to think about potentially harmful impacts of this and using it, spraying it, on the environment and what kind of impacts that could have. And sort of this parallel process of slander and defamation that she ultimately endured trying to protect people and the environment. And RFK Jr. was on a team that produced this landmark settlement, this litigation against Monsanto. In addition to taking on big food, RFK Jr., he's spoken out against corrupt practices of pharmaceutical companies for many years. And, as you can imagine, the majority of news that one may be exposed to in the media is actually produced by special interests in an attempt to mislead, attack, and defame. And I think a lot of people have woken up to this, and that's why you're seeing people leave traditional news sources behind and flock to more independent news sources. The video double vision here also introduces the Monsanto papers, something that I think, if we study past history, we look at what happened with the corruption of the Monsanto papers. I think we can see right now how history may be repeating itself. And we end with examples of astroturfing against RFK Jr. and highlight an example from a popular podcaster of how a major news outlet continues to lie about him on national television.
It was 1962, the height of the Cold War, a moment when unrelenting anxiety about the future was leavened by an abiding faith in the power of science to secure our safety and prosperity. Then came an incendiary book that sowed seeds of doubt.
This is one of the nation's best sellers, first printed on September 27, 1962. Up to now, 500,000 copies have been sold, and Silent Spring has been called the most controversial book of the year.
At the eye of the storm was Rachel Carson, one of the most celebrated American writers of her time. With her first 3 books, a lyrical trilogy about the sea, Carson had opened people's eyes to the natural world. Now, in Silent Spring, she delivered the dark warning that they might soon destroy it.
If we are ever to solve the basic problem of environmental contamination, we must begin to count the many hidden costs of what we are doing.
Carson was arguing was for caution. She really confronted the orthodoxies of her time.
She was accused of being a communist, of being a hysterical female Luddite. The reaction was to attack the messenger.
To some, Silent Spring was an act of heroism. To others, an irresponsible breach of scientific objectivity. But there could be no dispute that with her rebuke to modern technological science, Carson had shattered a paradigm.
Rachel Carson not only changed the kind of questions we ask about the environment, I think she caused us to start to ask those questions. She's the instigator.
After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. military had rushed DDT to the battle zones in an effort to protect American troops from insect-borne diseases such as typhus, which was spread by lice and left untreated could kill.
This was Naples, Italy, shortly after the Allied occupation. Its crowded population lacked almost everything for the safeguarding of public health. The perfect setup for epidemic.
Naples is really a city under siege, and typhus spreads quickly under those kinds of conditions. So they set up spray stations in the cities, spraying thousands of people a day with hand sprayers, people who wanted to get sprayed, people who didn't want to get sprayed, children, elderly.
Next, the 40,000 Italians dwelling in the jam-packed air raid shelters were deloused.
In all, more than 1 million people were dusted with DDT, and the epidemic was stopped in its tracks. Neapolitans, the New York Times reported, are now throwing DDT at brides instead of rice.
It's considered to be a miracle substance in that it saved hundreds of thousands of lives.
By the middle of 1944, Time magazine had pronounced DDT one of the great scientific discoveries of World War II. To Reader's Digest, Rachel Carson was offering a new angle, a piece exploring DDT's potential to cause collateral damage to wildlife.
Biologists with the Fish and Wildlife Service begin to see pretty quickly that when DDT is used in certain areas, there's evidence of problems. There's evidence of fish kill or bird kill. And they see that. And like any expert, they publish it in a place where other experts will read it. But how that information then filters out to a larger public is a very big question.
Carson understood the implications of this. She wanted to write a story warning people that we need to be a little bit careful with this. This looks like it's a great thing, but we maybe need to be cautious in how we use it, how much of it we use.
But Reader's Digest doesn't want this article. They essentially say, oh, housewives would be just turned off by this. They wouldn't want to know about this terrible stuff. So no, thank you.
So we can really start to get a sense of the smear campaign that was organized against Rachel Carson here. It was systematic, vicious, and extremely pervasive in American culture. John Stossel, who you may remember was a popular ABC News correspondent and never passed up an opportunity to attack Rachel Carson. And I think this short clip really demonstrates how these attacks can add to the propaganda surrounding a person who is actually fighting for justice.
Although environmentalists worship her, I say she's a mass murderer.
So this next excerpt is from Dr. Mark Hyman's podcast. He's a physician who believes in functional integrative medicine. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of smear campaigns against him. RFK Jr. talks about meeting Rachel Carson and his perspective really on her attacks by the media, the government, and a lot of other key stakeholders. He also introduces this idea of industry capture, which is part of capture theory coined by George Stigler, an economist, a Nobel laureate who in the 1970s essentially argued that our regulatory systems in the United States couldn't really function properly when they are funded by the systems that they are supposed to regulate. Seems like a pretty legitimate concern. So thinking about my personal experiences with this theory during my community organizing efforts in wetland conservation, we were told by our local government and the DNR that it would be better for the environment to build a 5-story parking garage versus a surface level parking lot. And so, let's think about that for a second. The planning department within the city is basically assuring the public that they have worked hand in hand with the DNR, who assures us again that it would be much better for the environment to have sort of this large scale construction project involving piling, right? If you know anything about piling, you know that that's a very invasive form of building instead of making the surface lot. And so that's what was being argued. It actually had nothing to do with environmental impact. It was all about how the city could make more money in terms of what they would approve or not approve in that development. Their expert who talked in front of the city council, this wetland scientist, essentially a paid spokesperson for the car dealership, agreed with this. And when pressed, if noise pollution could disrupt this wetland habitat, he said he was not aware of any noise pollution studies as it related to wetland development. And I remember I was literally sitting there looking on Google Scholar and seeing hundreds of studies, just scrolling through on my phone about, noise pollution and how this can disrupt habitats. Even studies on piling, the piling process and how that disrupts habitats and ecosystems. So during this process, I tried to get information right from the DNR. I asked questions respectfully to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, to a lot of other agencies and key stakeholders. I was ignored. In some cases, they did follow up with me after I called like 20 times and made a stink, but they were nasty and unprofessional. And, you know, they, the people that I connected with were supposed to be public facing people. Like they're supposed to engage the public. And they were nasty, they were not professional. And, when I started talking with other key stakeholders and agencies that may have a vested interest in this wetland, they identified that they had already heard about me, right? So, definitely a personal local example of how, these agencies were actually captured, right? And not really able to fulfill their regulatory duties, and initiated a smear campaign against me in the local community.
My first consciousness of Monsanto was when I was a little boy, because I met Rachel Carson when I was
you
a kid.
did?
And she came to my house at
For
Hickory
those who
Hill.
don't know, who was Rachel Carson?
Rachel Carson was probably the, most people would say she was the central figure in the environmental movement and as the kind of founder of modern environmentalism. She wrote a book. She was an extraordinary woman. She was a brilliant marine biologist. She wrote a whole series of New York Times bestsellers that every one of them broke records for the length of time on the New York Times bestseller list. She was not only a very gifted marine biologist, and interestingly, she was from, I think, Reading, Pennsylvania, and she never saw the ocean until she was 22 years old.
Wow.
But she was 180 IQ, and she was a brilliant writer and a brilliant communicator, and had this gift of empathy for all creatures. And
She wrote Silent Spring, which was sort of the beginning.
And she wrote Silent Spring, and Silent Spring was a really important book, because up until she wrote that book, nobody did not believe that the chemical industry was was what it pretended to be, which was this huge boon to American
Better
prosperity,
living through chemistry,
better
right?
living. It was. It had, it had helped us win the war against fascism, and now it was going to help us. It was going to allow us to win the war against the insects and create free food, abundant food for everybody. And she wrote a book that, for the first time, disclosed to Americans in very, very clear language with very well-sourced science the price we were paying for that temporary cheap food solution was actually imposing enormous costs that, if we had known about them, we would have never taken the deal, not only to human health, but that, the term Silent Spring indicated that it was going to eliminate, the birds and the insects and things that a lot of people didn't think that we really cared about that much. But she showed us why we should care about it. And in fact, it was a very prescient book. About 90% of birds, songbirds in America, have disappeared.
90%.
Since she wrote that book. We're living in a very different world today than I grew up in and you grew up in.
Yeah.
She was attacked viciously by Monsanto, and a lot of people, looked at what Monsanto did during the Roundup cases, which I was just on that legal team, and they said that Monsanto took the blueprint from the tobacco industry, but Monsanto really was the company that created that blueprint, or how do you quash dissent against your product. And, the tobacco industry did it very masterfully for 60 years by manipulating science and creating doubt, and they were able to escape any regulation of a product that was killing 1 out of every 4 of its customers who used that product as directed.
Cigarettes.
But Monsanto really was the mastermind for those techniques. And they hired Hill and Knowlton and Edelman, and they created these PR firms that really, from the ground up, went out to lie to the public, to hire these phony scientists. We call them biostitutes.
Biostitutes. That's good.
To generate tobacco science, junk science, just to sow doubt.
Yeah, that's what the food industry does too.
And that was their strategy. But when Rachel Carson published this book, and it was published in serial form in the New Yorker magazine, and then it went on to, then the book was consolidated, and I think it stayed for many, many months on the bestseller list. I remember 62 weeks or something that it was #1 on the bestseller list. And that could be wrong, but I think that's right. They mounted a very, very concerted and deliberative attack against her. They sent these white-coated lab scientists and medical doctors every community in the country to lecture about the benefits of pesticides and how, Rachel Carson was crazy.
Yeah.
And they went out and they found third-party front groups with integrity, the institutions in our society, who they would secretly co-opt with payoffs, et cetera, who then go out and act on their behalf without their fingerprints on it. And they got the American Medical Association to condemn Rachel Carson. They got Time Magazine, Life Magazine, Sports Illustrated, the American Garden Clubs, all of them to attack Carson. And if you read the contemporary critiques of her at that time, they almost all use the same language, and they often attack her very personally. You'll read that she's a spinster, which was the modern, the contemporary euphemism for lesbian.
Oh, no.
So they're really trying to discredit her, and she never defended herself. She was dying of cancer at the time. But I'm very proud that my uncle, President Kennedy, stepped in, and he defied his own USDA, his Department of Agriculture, which had already been captured. It was a captured agency. It was all bought and owned by Monsanto, even at that early date. The
Really?
food industry owned the USDA, and that's a huge problem
It
today.
is, yeah.
And they were attacking her, and he had to go against them. He created an independent. He got Jerome Wisner, who was his chief science advisor, to put together a panel of scientists with impeccable credentials to go through every important or relevant material assertion in her book and to validate the science. And they came back and they absolutely vindicated Carson. And but at the time that I met her, when she visited Hickory Hill, she was under attack.
Yeah.
President Kennedy's vindication of her ended up being an important part in planting the seeds for Earth Day, which happened 7 years later. The first Earth Day and the passage of Fight for the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act in 1973, and the ban that year of DDT.
Yeah.
So these clips really showcase the continuous lies perpetuated by these big industries, such as Monsanto, which is now Bayer, right? The clips, they have all been taken from a show that is produced in Australia and on their ABC news outlet. I think the news outlet's called Four Corners. And they produce this. I think it's something like Secret Tactics Monsanto Used is the name of it. And, you know, Monsanto was so stigmatized during the initial litigation that Bayer, they had to sell the company and have it fold into Bayer, a pharmaceutical company. So back, you may remember hearing about this back in, I think it was like 2018 or around that time. There was a janitor, groundskeeper, Mr. Dwayne Johnson, who was awarded like 200 and some $1 million from Monsanto because a jury agreed with him that, him using Roundup as a school janitor probably did give him this non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it was a really significant case because, it was the first time that the civil litigation was successful against, this huge giant like Monsanto. And who do you think was involved in that litigation team? So, ding, ding, ding. You probably guessed it, RFK Jr. You will also hear, in some of these clips from the VP of Bayer, right, who is encouraging us to trust the science, trying to reassure everybody that Roundup does not cause cancer, continuously stating that there is enough scientific research behind this and that we should all essentially believe the science. And then you really catch a small glimpse of the corruption and the industry capture that was evident in this case. And, what I think is truly interesting is that this, video, this documentary was produced in Australia. And when I looked on YouTube, when I looked on the internet to try to find some video clips from some media sources in the United States, I couldn't find anything from any of the major news networks. It was all small, independent, local media that had anything about this. So I think that's really telling. I think it's also telling that Monsanto has been successful, almost, which is really scary, in their efforts to get the federal government to basically give them immunity from lawsuits, right? Just like the government did for pharmaceutical companies. So, they created this vaccine injury program. I can't remember what it's called, but basically, if you feel like you've had a vaccine injury, you can't really go through the litigation process directly through the pharmaceutical company, you know. So now you are doing this other process through the federal government, which this legislation essentially made it so you can't sue the actual makers of the drug who gave you the vaccine injury. And as you may know, Monsanto, or I guess Bayer, now that they're called, it has been trying to convince the federal government to do the same thing, right, for pesticides use, which would be incredibly dangerous. And I am so glad that that has not passed yet. So again, you know, the interviewer in these clips, I think, did just a masterful job, right? Asking how the Australian people can trust this agency. I forgot the name of it, but it operates like the EPA there, when they receive a lot of their funding directly through a lobbying group for Monsanto, you know? So, same situation in the United States where our regulatory bodies are funded by the agencies that they are supposed to regulate. So, you know, that really is the definition of a conflict of interest.
Madam Foreperson, does the jury have a verdict? All right, can you please hand the verdict to the bailiff? All right, I will now read the verdict in the matter of Dwayne Johnson, plaintiff versus Monsanto Company, defendant.
The jury found Roundup was a substantial factor in causing Mr. Johnson's cancer, and that Monsanto failed to warn of the risk.
Question number 17. What amount of punitive damages, if any, do you award to Mr. Johnson? The answer was $250 million. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this now concludes your service as jurors in this case.
I'm glad to be here to be able to help, but the cause is way bigger than me. So hopefully this thing will start to get the attention that it needs to get right so folks can make a good choice.
And then the remaining jurors...
Monsanto is challenging the verdict.
I feel sorry for Mr. Johnson. I have tremendous sympathy for what he and his family are going through. When I look at the jury verdict, the decision, it's wrong, and it doesn't change the science. It doesn't change the 40 years of safe use, the 800 tests, the agricultural health study. It doesn't change the science. Obviously, the science didn't resonate with that jury. We want to understand why, because we need to do a better job explaining the science so people understand that glyphosate-based products are safe.
I can really say nothing's changed. We had the outcome in the verdict in California. There's really nothing new. I mean, I would look at that as one case. Doesn't change 800 scientific studies. It doesn't change 40 years of use. It doesn't change the incredible value that product's brought to agriculture and to consumers worldwide. And we're thoroughly supportive of the product, and we'll continue to work through the legal process that's available to us. It's a horrible and unfortunate situation with the plaintiff, Mr. Johnson. We have great sympathy for him and his family, but Roundup does not cause cancer.
Released this statement claiming more than 800 scientific studies and reviews support the fact that glyphosate does not cause cancer. Do the 800 studies all relate to cancer, or do they relate to other potential illnesses?
All types of risks and hazards and diseases, a wide variety, which we're required to do. When we obtain registrations from governments around the world, they don't simply ask you, does it cause cancer or not? You know, they want to know all aspects of health and safety related to the product.
When Monsanto says there are 800 studies showing that it's safe, we have no idea how many of those studies might be authentic, independent scientific studies. We know that the scientific literature has been corrupted.
For decades, questions have been raised around the safety of Roundup and its key ingredient, glyphosate. Now, Monsanto's strategies to protect its flagship product have been exposed in a trove of internal documents. They reveal a long-standing, aggressive campaign of deception and dirty tricks. The documents are known as the Monsanto Papers.
These are discovery documents that Monsanto was forced to turn over to the plaintiffs in the litigation. And so far, Monsanto itself says that it's turned over about 10 million pages of documents. And this has really been eye-opening because we've seen so much evidence of how the company has worked to hide the risks of its products.
For nearly 20 years, journalist and author Carey Gillam has been investigating Monsanto.
We know that Monsanto has ghostwritten scientific literature. We don't know how much. We don't know how extensive it is. We do know that there are papers that they have ghostwritten that are out there right now, sitting in journals, looking to be authentic, that Monsanto secretly had a hand in manipulating.
In the 1970s, Monsanto used a company called Industrial Biotech Laboratories to test Roundup to get it registered with the US regulator, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. The lab was caught up in a fraud scandal.
It was found that this laboratory was actually just doctoring a lot of the numbers, just sort of cooking the books, so to speak, on these safety studies.
They weren't fraudulent results. I think there were methods that were being used that weren't in line with all of the other studies.
In the mid-1980s, a new study prompted scientists from the EPA to classify glyphosate as possibly carcinogenic to humans. Monsanto refused to accept the finding.
This went on until eventually in the early 1990s, the EPA decided to just go along with Monsanto and overrule its own toxicologist. But it was very controversial, and in the final decision in which EPA determined they would classify glyphosate as not likely to be carcinogenic, some of their own scientists refused to sign off on that.
Despite the US court case and the IARC finding, the regulator, the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority, the APVMA, hasn't formally reviewed glyphosate in more than 2 decades.
We looked at the IARC report and had an extensive scientific evaluation of the IARC report, and we concluded that there was no reason for us to be changing our regulatory position on glyphosate, and that glyphosate remains safe to use in the Australian environment.
Questions have been raised about the APVMA's independence, as most of its funding comes from the industry it regulates.
That's the system that's in place to ensure that industry pays for the privilege of participating in the Australian market. They pay so we can regulate their chemicals.
How can the public expect that you'll seriously police these products when you directly benefit from the sale of these products? You seem to have a financial interest in keeping these products on the shelves.
No, we don't have a financial interest in it. Our interest is ensuring that the products in the marketplace work and are safe. And I think our track record over the years and our track record since I've been in charge of the organisation suggests that we take that particular responsibility extremely seriously.
If an industry is paying for a service, they're presuming that they will get a service. And it's possible that the service then, the government agency sees themselves as a service to industry instead of seeing themselves as a protection for the Australian people.
If you go down the history of the sort of really bad chemicals, pesticides in U.S. society or even world society, every single one of them has its origins in Monsanto. I mean, for the last 150 years, whether it be DDT, PCBs, Agent Orange, dioxin. I mean, Monsanto has been behind all of those. Monsanto has effectively made a business out of poisoning people and getting away with it. For the last 20 or 30 years, Monsanto has engaged in a systematic and deliberate campaign to attack any science that says their product is not safe and to attack any scientist that has the courage to say something. They have a corporate culture that has zero interest in safety and has only an interest in maintaining the ability of them to sell this product.
It is the safest herbicide that's ever been developed. It has just an amazing, amazing record of not just productivity and use, but also the extent to which it has been examined and scrutinized and studied over 40 years.
So in these next clips, we hear from Cheryl Atkinson. She is this Emmy award winning investigative journalist. You know, she wrote things that have been on the New York Times bestseller list. She defines what astroturfing means in our American culture, and she gives us examples of it. She gives us ways to detect it, which can really be so challenging, right? Because of the pervasiveness of it. And I think a lot of people post COVID have really flocked to other news sources and don't rely on the news that they see pop up on their phones or in mainstream media because they know a lot of it is bought and paid for and carried out through these big industries that, you know, legitimately have their own agendas, which focuses on profits and not the inherent safety of people or our environments.
So, consider this fictitious example that's inspired by real life. Say you're watching the news and you see a story about a new study on the cholesterol-lowering drug called Cholextra. The study says Cholextra is so effective that doctors should consider prescribing it to adults and even children who don't yet have high cholesterol. Is it too good to be true? You're smart, you decide to do some of your own research. You do a Google search, you consult social media, Facebook and Twitter, you look at Wikipedia, WebMD, a nonprofit website, and you read the original study in a peer-reviewed published medical journal. It all confirms how effective Cholextra is. You do run across a few negative comments and a potential link to cancer, but you dismiss that because medical experts call the cancer link a myth and say that those who think there is a link there are quacks and cranks and nuts. Finally, you learn that your own doctor recently attended a medical seminar. The lecture that he attended confirmed how effective Cholextra is, so he sends you off with some free samples and a prescription. You've really done your homework.
If you're looking for a career where you can really make a difference in the world, to help and connect with others in a...
But what if all isn't as it seems? What if the reality you found was false? A carefully constructed narrative by unseen special interests designed to manipulate your opinion. A Truman Show-esque alternate reality all around you. Complacency in the news media combined with incredibly powerful propaganda and publicity forces mean we sometimes get little of the truth. Special interests have unlimited time and money to figure out new ways to spin us while cloaking their role. Surreptitious astroturf methods are now more important to these interests than traditional lobbying of Congress. There's an entire industry built around it in Washington. What is astroturf? It's a perversion of grassroots, as in fake grassroots. AstroTurf is when political, corporate, or other special interests disguise themselves and publish blogs, start Facebook and Twitter accounts, publish ads, letters to the editor, or simply post comments online to try to fool you into thinking an independent or grassroots movement is speaking. The whole point of AstroTurf is to try to give the impression there's widespread support for or against an agenda when there's not. AstroTurf seeks to manipulate you into changing your opinion by making you feel as if you're an outlier when you're not. Astroturfers seek to controversialize those who disagree with them. They attack news organizations that publish stories they don't like, whistleblowers who tell the truth, politicians who dare to ask the tough questions, and journalists who have the audacity to report on all of it. Sometimes astroturfers simply shove intentionally so much confusing and conflicting information into the mix that you're left to throw up your hands and disregard all of it, including the truth. Drown out a link between a medicine and a harmful side effect, say vaccines and autism, by throwing a bunch of conflicting paid-for studies, surveys, and experts into the mix, confusing the truth beyond recognition. And then there's Wikipedia. AstroTurf's dream come true. Billed as the free encyclopedia that anyone can edit, the reality can't be more different. Anonymous Wikipedia editors control and co-opt pages on behalf of special interests. They forbid and reverse edits that go against their agenda. They skew and delete information in blatant violation of Wikipedia's own established policies with impunity, always superior to the poor schlubs who actually believe anyone can edit Wikipedia, only to discover they're barred from correcting even the simplest factual inaccuracies. Try adding a footnoted fact or correcting a fact error on one of these monitored Wikipedia pages and poof, sometimes within a matter of seconds you'll find your edit is reversed. In 2012, famed author Philip Roth tried to correct a major fact error about the inspiration behind one of his book characters cited on a Wikipedia page. But no matter how hard he tried, Wikipedia's editors wouldn't allow it. They kept reverting the edits back to the false information. When Roth finally reached a person at Wikipedia, which was no easy task, and tried to find out what was going wrong, they told him he simply was not considered a credible source on himself. A few weeks later, there was a huge scandal when Wikipedia officials got caught offering a PR service that skewed and edited information on behalf of paid, publicity-seeking clients in utter opposition to Wikipedia's supposed policies. All of this may be why, when a medical study looked at medical conditions described on Wikipedia pages and compared it to actual peer-reviewed published research, Wikipedia contradicted medical research 90% of the time. You may never fully trust what you read on Wikipedia again, nor should you. I'll go back to that fictitious Colextra example and all the research you did. It turns out the Facebook and Twitter accounts you found that were so positive were actually written by paid professionals hired by the drug company to promote the drug. The Wikipedia page had been monitored by an agenda editor also paid by the drug company. The drug company also arranged to optimize Google search engine results, so it was no accident that you stumbled across that positive nonprofit that had all those positive comments. The nonprofit was, of course, secretly founded and funded by the drug company. The drug company also financed that positive study and used its power of editorial control to omit any mention of cancer as a possible side effect. Once more, each and every doctor who publicly touted Colextra or called the cancer link a myth, or ridiculed critics as paranoid cranks and quacks, or served on a government advisory board that approved the drug, each of those doctors is actually a paid consultant for the drug company. As for your own doctor, the medical lecture he attended that had all those positive evaluations was, in fact, like many continuing medical education classes, sponsored by the drug company. And when the news reported on that positive study, it didn't mention any of that. What can I do? I thought I'd done my research. What chance do I have separating fact from fiction, especially if seasoned journalists with years of experience can be so easily fooled? Well, I have a few strategies that I can tell you about to help you recognize signs of propaganda and AstroTurf. Once you start to know what to look for, you'll begin to recognize it everywhere. First, hallmarks of AstroTurf include use of inflammatory language such as crank, quack, nutty, lies, paranoid, pseudo, and conspiracy. AstroTurfers often claim to debunk myths that aren't myths at all. Use of the charged language tests well. People hear something's a myth, maybe they find it on Snopes, and they instantly declare themselves too smart to fall for it. But what if the whole notion of the myth is itself a myth, and you and Snopes fell for that? Beware when interests attack an issue by controversializing or attacking the people, personalities, and organizations surrounding it rather than addressing the facts. That could be AstroTurf. And most of all, AstroTurfers tend to reserve all of their public skepticism for those exposing wrongdoing rather than the wrongdoers. In other words, instead of questioning authority, they question those who question authority. you might start to see things a little more clearly. It's kind of like taking off your glasses and wiping them and putting them back on and realizing for the first time how foggy they'd been all along. I can't resolve these issues, but I hope that I've given you some information that will at least motivate you to take off your glasses and wipe them and become a wiser consumer of information in an increasingly artificial, paid-for reality. Thank you.
I would encourage you all to look up on Google, does glyphosate cause cancer? And as you can see, out of several results, all of them say there is no evidence that glyphosate causes cancer, with information from the EPA also. So, as a small business owner with my own website, I studied search engine optimization and companies like Ahrefs, where you can legitimately study online topics and get a lot of data about how you can frame your article or whatever your content is that you're going to be posting to ensure that you can get a lot of hits. You can also pay Google to put your content towards the top of the results list. So the internet world is really bought and paid for and is very manipulated. I mean, it's really shocking to see these results in Google when you are typing in, does glyphosate cause cancer? Um, but as we know, that's all by design. So in this next clip, it's from the Joe Rogan Experience. He has on Sanjay Gupta, the chief medical correspondent for CNN, on his show. And in this clip, he's repeatedly asking him why CNN continues to lie about him. And you may remember Joe Rogan has been attacked for years in the media. Not really when he was more left leaning, more identified as a Democrat, but as soon as he started shifting more to the right, that's when they started calling him racist. They tried to get Spotify to take down his podcast. You may remember that. Just a really, really incredibly dangerous smear campaign because they saw the power he was getting. They saw what he was becoming. And they really tried to take him down. They're still trying to take him down. So, anecdotally, I heard that one of the presidential debates had like 6 million views on network television. And, his interview with Trump right before the election had like 40 some million views. And now I think that number is much higher. But that really just illustrates that people are waking up to this media deception and trying to find alternate sources of information.
So for you, Joe Rogan,
yes,
I would say you've had it.
Yes.
So now get one shot of the vaccine.
No.
Why not?
Because I have better immunity than I would if I was vaccinated. Right?
Yes.
Don't I?
I think your immunity is really good.
So why, if I've already gotten through COVID and I was really only sick for a day, and then 5 days later I was negative, and I do have the natural antibodies now, why would I take a chance in getting vaccinated on top of that?
By the way, I'm glad you're better. I'm glad it only lasted a day.
You're probably the only one at CNN that's glad.
No. We're not.
The rest of them are all lying about me taking horse medication. And we should talk about that.
That bothered you.
It should bother you, too. They're lying at your network about people taking human drugs versus drugs for veterinary.
Calling it a horse dewormer is not a flattering thing. I get that.
It's a lie. It's a lie on a news network, and it's a lie that's a willing... That's a lie that they're conscious of. This is not a mistake.
Yeah.
They're unfavorably framing it as veterinary medicine.
Well, the FDA put this thing out. You saw that. Did you see that thing that the FDA put out?
What did the FDA put out?
It was a tweet, and it was snarky. I admit it. They said, you are not a horse, you are not a cow, stop taking this stuff, or something like that.
Why would you say that when you're talking about a drug that's been given out to billions and billions of people, a drug that was responsible for one of the inventors of it making the
Nobel Prize.
The Nobel Prize in 2015?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
a drug that has been shown to stop viral replication in vitro. You know that, right? Why would they lie and say that's horse dewormer. I can afford people medicine, motherfucker. This is ridiculous. It's just a lie.
I don't think anyone is.
But don't you think that a lie like that is dangerous on a news network when you know that they know they're lying? You know that they know that I took medicine. Like, here it is. This is ivermectin.
You got
This
it
is
with
right
you.
here. Somebody gave it to me.
All right, hang on. The thing is, we're like going so fast. Like I feel like I'm missing.
Do you think that's a problem that your news network
was not-
lies?
Well, I don't.
Dude,
what did they say?
They lied
What did
and
they
said
say?
I was taking horse dewormer. First of all, it was prescribed to me by a doctor.
Yeah.
Along
They
with
shouldn't have said
a
it was
bunch of other
if it was-
medications.
if you got a human pill, because there were people that were taking it, the veterinary medication, and you're not, obviously. You got it from a doctor, so that it shouldn't be called that. Ivermectin can be a very effective medication for parasitic disease, and as you say, it's probably, I think what, 250 million people have taken it around the world.
More,
I get that.
Way more.
So
way more. Billions of people have taken it.
Can I just come back to the one I want to talk about? Two things on
You
the
have
ledger.
you have, before we get to that, does it bother you that the news network you work for out and out lied, just outright lied about me taking horse dewormer?
They shouldn't have said that.
Why did they do that?
I don't know.
You didn't ask? You didn't think that was you're the
I
medical
didn't-
guy over there.
I didn't ask. I should have asked before
But they
coming
did
on
it
your
with
podcast.
such glee.
No,
Yes,
Joe.
they did. I watched. I
You
watched.
watched?
I watched.
You watched? No, I don't think there's
Yes,
glee.
they did.
I don't. No one takes.
Joe Rogan says he has
She's taking-
COVID, taking livestock drug despite warnings. Yeah.
Jamie had to pull this up.
You want
huh?
to play it?
Does she?
This
have
is your
glee?
news network.
I'm gonna watch.
Let's see.
I'm gonna watch.
Rogan telling his 13 million Instagram followers that he was treated with several drugs, and he included ivermectin on the list, a drug used for livestock. The FDA and the CDC warn against using to treat COVID.
Turns out I got COVID. Look, they put a yellow
we
filter on me
threw
too.
the kitchen sink at her. All
They
kinds
did.
of meds. Monoclonal
You see the original
antibodies,
video versus that? I look like shit there.
Z-Pak,
Do you know that?
I think you look good.
Pause. It's enough.
Prednisone.
I don't
That's
think
enough, Jamie.
I don't think Aaron had glee.
Oh, well, it's more Brian Stelter was the gleeful one. But the point is, that's a lie.
It can be used for humans. I get it. I totally.
Not just could be used for humans, is often used for humans along with all the other drugs I took. All human drugs.
Yes.
They know it's a human drug.
It's right. But
and they lied.
The thing.
It's defamatory.
It is. Yeah, they shouldn't have done that.
It's defamatory, right?
Well, I don't know if it's defamatory.
I bet it is.
Well, I'm not a lawyer.
It's a lie.
Well, see, here's the thing. You can have nuanced discussions about this.
No,
right?
you can't.
Yeah,
you can't have nuanced discussions about lying about someone taking horse dewormer.
There was no glee, by the way, from her. She was.
Well,
And I don't
I
think
didn't watch her.
anyone takes people's illness.
Oh, yes, they do.
They don't want you to get
stop
sick,
it.
Joe.
Yes, they do.
They
were
want you to get
upset that
sick.
I got healthy. That's one thing they didn't report on. The fact that I was negative 5 days later and working out 6 days later.
Well,
6 days after infection, I was back in the gym.
I'm glad.
Felt great.
I'm glad you do. I really
Me
am.
too.
I think
Thank you.
Most of the
I'm
people.
glad you're glad. You're a nice guy.
Most of the people I know, I think, would be glad that you. I don't think that there was any glee.
There's a lot of people out there that weren't glad. But my point is, you're working for a news organization. If they're lying about a comedian taking horse medication, what are they telling us about Russia? What are they telling us about Syria? Do you understand that that's why people get concerned about the veracity of the news?
So there is this article on RFK Jr. and Maha Moms, Make America Healthy Again. And it asserted that these Maha moms are using fear mongering and that they show this photo of RFK Jr. The article is from Katie Couric Media, and it uses the same tactics that we were warned about by Cheryl Atkinson. Specifically, the article offers to debunk myths right in the title. Lots of information here in the article that seems very misleading and not true. And Maha Moms are actually a pretty influential grassroots movement going on right now. And they're being portrayed as crazy, uneducated, hysterical. I mean, we've all seen this playbook before. So I'd encourage you to look up this article for yourself, see what you think. And I'm ending with a clip of Dr. Mark Hyman introducing RFK Jr. on his podcast. And I want you to listen to his background, education, achievements, and see if this is the type of person who has been portrayed in the media.
Chemicals in our food, particularly glyphosate or weed killer called Roundup, which is on 70% of our food and has been linked to cancer and microbiome issues and lots more health concerns, then this podcast is going to matter to you because it's with my friend and activist lawyer, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's an extraordinary guy. We've known each other for many years. We've traveled the world together. We've kayaked and rafted in Peru, in Chile. We've gone through many adventures, near-death experiences, and it's just been a pleasure knowing Bobby because not only is he an activist, leader, environmentalist, but he's also a heck of a lot of fun. So Bobby serves as the president of Waterkeeper Alliance. He's the chairman of the board and chief legal counsel for the Children's Health Defense and of counsel to Morgan & Morgan, which is a nationwide personal injury practice. He was the chief prosecuting attorney for Hudson Riverkeeper. And when he was involved with the Hudson Riverkeepers, he helped hold General Electric accountable and had over $1 billion settlement to make them clean up the Hudson River from all the PCBs they dumped in there. He's a defender of the environment and children's health, and he's had many, many successful legal actions. He was named one of Time Magazine's Heroes for the Planet for his success in helping Riverkeeper lead the fight to restore Hudson River. This group's achievement has helped spawn 300 waterkeeper organizations around the globe. He also was a co-host of Ring of Fire on Air America Radio. I was on that show once. He served as a assistant district attorney in New York City. He's worked on environmental issues across America and has helped many indigenous tribes in Latin America and Canada negotiate treaties protecting traditional homelands. He's credited with leading the fight to protect New York City's water supply and has done so much good in the world. He wrote a number of great best-selling books, including Crimes Against Nature. He went to Harvard Law School. He graduated from the London School of Economics and got his law degree from the University of Virginia Law School, and is just an extraordinary man.
I am so appreciative that you joined me in this video. I hope that it was helpful to you in some way. You know, as I talk to students in my policy class, social policy issues are very complex. They are often values based. So when someone is confronted with something that they feel challenges their belief or core value, um, you see a lot of times these visceral responses, and there are a lot of forces in our American society that have tapped into this in some pretty dark ways. You know, this drive to further divisions and hatred for their own corporate gains. So, you know, my practice fundamentally as a social worker is to always approach somebody with caring, with curiosity, right? That's a big one. And with genuine respect. And I've worked with so many different people, coworkers, organizations, clients who have different views than I do. And I don't think that means we can't partner together. You know, there is this Mother Teresa quote, and I may not be saying it right word for word, but it's something like, if you judge someone, you don't have time to love them. And that is a really powerful expression to me as to how I want to live my life and to treat others around me. And I just continue to hope that we can see things more clearly through this double vision analogy, and that we can use this as you know, I don't know if guide is the right word, but some sort of lesson as we approach often, you know, conflict prone social policy discussions. So thanks again. Really appreciate you watching this and joining me in this. Thank you.